The following video was pre-recorded, and then I realized that I needed to give a few assumptions to this video. This video really is strictly on how I join my ends at the binding, how I finish it off. So this video will assume that you know how to make a binding and how to do mitered edges, how to start a binding on a quilted project, that you leave a little bit, about, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 inches of a tail when you go to put the binding on. There will be video at the end that shows me putting on and finishing the last part of the binding. But because of my slow upload times here in the Mountain West, I have really bad luck at uploading, I should say, 12 and 14 minute videos. So, but anyway, I kind of stay true to a 2-inch binding. 2.5, unless it's flannel, a flannel quilt, I might do a 2.5, but for the most part, I use a 2-inch binding, and they are joined at a 45-degree angle. I'm using 2 separate pieces here so you can see the contrast and see a little easier. In theory, when you're putting a binding on a quilt, let me see if I can explain this. When you're putting a binding on a quilt, you want all the seams, the joining seams, to be and look the same. In my mind, this is not a hard concept. It's just when you're sewing along, you're sewing one here, and then you will have this angled seam like this. Then you'll attach another 2-inch strip up here, and all your strips are the same, 2 inches wide. Whatever your width is, you make that decision. But when you go to put it on and of course then they're ironed in half. But when you go to put that on your quilt, you leave a small tail, probably, like I said, 6 to 8 inches. Sew it on, and then watch the rest of this video, and I'll show you how to finish it off. That's the important part. That's what I want you to learn, because sometimes books and magazines, they have you doing bindings all wrong. Most quilters shy away from doing bindings. In my business, especially right around Christmas time, I will get quilt orders that come in and they request that I do the binding because they don't have time to worry about how to do a binding correctly, or my clients don't know how to do a binding at all. But once you get a quilt top quilted, you're just left with kind of a frayed edge, and you really want to put a binding on that quilt. I mean, that's kind of the final process or the final step. It's almost like framing a picture. Right. Sorry, I'm seeing a bee in my studio, so I might have to go get that bee, but it looks like a wasp actually. But this is eventually what you're going to want to end up with is a nice binding. But the key to good bindings is to joining them correctly at the end. The first thing I do when I look at a quilt magazine or a quilt book that's a how-to or a go-to quilt book, I flip to the back of that book and I analyze how they finish their bindings, how they show you as a student to finish off the binding. And some of them have a hokey way of just encasing one in another, or folding it and ironing it and then whip stitching it shut. My bindings, if you're going to make bindings, why not join them all the same at a 90-degree angle? I stitched this one on with white thread, and I'm going to show you the process here in just a minute when I do my final editing so that you could see it. Normally I would stitch this on with red thread so you couldn't see it, and of course I will tack it to the back with red thread. But this is just a table runner. I don't want to say just. More and more people are going to smaller and smaller quilts. I bought this. This is a Minnick & Simpson piece. I bought probably 2 or 3 yards many years ago. And this is a gift that I make for some newlyweds that I'm invited to weddings or bridal showers, whatever I need a gift or hostess gift for. It's just cheater's cloth. It's nothing pieced by me, but I put the whole piece of fabric on my long arm and I quilted it, and then I cut them up, and I think I've got probably 8 table runners that I can use for gifts. But now I have to do 8 separate bindings, and bindings do not scare me. I am all over bindings. But the key, like I said, is to make sure you join them correctly. Once you've put them on your quilt top, the joining process at the end just makes it much more of a professional finish. Okay, the first thing I do, of course, is figure out how much binding I need to make, and I measure length times the width, and then times 2, or length plus width, or length plus plus width, and I make enough binding, 2-inch binding, iron it, and I join the strips, the 2-inch strips, at a 90-degree angle. Then here you see me coming to the last corner. I'm assuming that for the most part, others know how to put on the binding, but you will see me here where the joining process of these 2 strips is, to me, really the most important part of the whole binding, and the part I want to focus on. I fold on a corner to make a miter. I fold it back at a 90 and then fold it on top of itself, and then I go ahead and stitch that down. I cut off my string tags right away, so I don't have to go chasing those down. I guess I'm just too much of an organized sewer to deal with that later. But here you kind of see me analyzing where I want to start and stop my seam, where I want to start and stop this joining these 2 strips together to create this binding and to finish this binding off. So I stop and I leave about a 6 or 8 inch opening, and you'll see that here in 1 second. I put it in front of me. I put the quilted article in front of me, and you can, I maybe 8-10 inches, and I find the center. I kind of eyeball the center, and there it is. So I fold the bottom right hand strip of binding, and I cut it off where my middle was going to meet. I take the top left hand side, and because this is a 2-inch binding, I get my ruler and I measure over 2 inches. I want a 2-inch overlap. So you kind of see me counting over there. If it's a 2.5-inch binding, you want a 2.5-inch overlap. But this is a 2-inch binding, so I cut it off at 2-inch mark. And that's why I kind of leave, I probably add 10 inches to the total circumference of my quilted article so that I can make sure I have enough and not run out of binding, and that's what you saw me throwing away. Then here's the very important part. You take the top left hand part of the binding, open it up. You take the bottom right hand and open it up, and right sides together, you join them at a 90-degree angle. It is no different than when you made the binding. Some people make their bindings with a straight seam. That's a very weak binding. You need to make your bindings with I guess it'd be about a 45-degree angle. But you're joining the seams at a 90-degree angle, and you're going to see me do something here that I never do. I never run over pins. I just never run over I never sew over pins. But because I'm showing you how to do this, I'll leave my pins in, and I'll hope I don't break a needle. But you sew it from corner to corner. You can draw a line with a chalk pencil if you want, or a what do you call those that erase anyway, with a hot iron. And there it's joined. It's joined just like the rest of the seams in the binding. This particular quilted object has 4 pieces of, well, actually 3 pieces of 2-inch binding. And this is the 4th seam to join them together. Here in a second, I will take the scissors and I will cut off that seam just like you would any other at about a 1/4 inch mark away from the seam. And it's joined. It's joined with no excess, no leftover. I went and I ironed it off camera, and I came back and you can see it's ironed just like a strip of binding would be, except it's measured and it's perfect for the width plus the length, and the width and the length. It's for the circumference. That's the word I want, for the circumference of this quilted project. Then you just finish sewing it down all along the way. And like I said, some quilters, until you get super, super confident, you might have a little pucker in your binding right here. But for the most part, if you've really measured your 2 inches over, kind of secured your measurements really well, it's gonna go on, and you do not have any excess. You're not short any binding either. This is what it looks like. It looks like just the regular seam to the binding, and there's no overlap, there's no bulge there, there's no excess, there's no bump. It looks really, really good. It finishes off your quilt really, really well. And that's what it would look like once you get it tacked to the back of the quilt top. There were 4 seams. They're all the same. Here's number 1. Here's number 2. The 3rd seam. They're all the same. They're just all the same. It's such an easy concept. And here's number 4, along with a mitered corner. Really easy bindings if you put your mind to it. My name is Shanda, and I am a quilt maker.